Second Chronicles chapter 12. Welcome back to the Bible study today. We are going to talk about Rehoboam again. You may have noticed in Second Chronicles a lot of the chapters, there's a bunch of chapters in the book, like 36, but the chapters are relatively short compared to some of the other books in the Bible. They seem like they average like in somewhere between like 18 to 26 verses or something like that. So they're a little bit easier to go through. You probably noticed that. Today we're in chapter 12, and once again it is somewhat of a shorter chapter. You can get the PDF outline on our website for free at tobelikechrist.com. Check out the links to that and other things down in the description. Well, you may have noticed that my face disappeared. That's because there's somebody sawing through metal with an electric saw outside of my apartment, and so filming in that room kind of became impossible. So this will be audio for the rest of the time. But okay, let's get into our PDF. When did these events take place in history, in the historical record? We've been talking about Rehoboam, who's Solomon's son, becoming king, and he became king about 975 BC. He reigned for 17 years over Judah, which was the southern kingdom after the split of the two kingdoms. He reigned from approximately 975 to 958 BC. When the kingdom of Israel, the northern kingdom, broke off of Judah, the people made Jeroboam their king. In reality, God actually selected Jeroboam to be their king, but the people did as well. Jeroboam was made king over Israel, and he was king for 22 years, from 975 to 953 BC. Now, as we think about the people that are central to this chapter, we have, of course, Rehoboam. He is the fourth king after King Saul, who was originally appointed over the United Kingdom, and he was the son of Solomon. He is now king over Judah in the south. Jeroboam, he was an Ephraimite who was originally one of Solomon's servants, and God and the people of Israel selected him to be the king of Israel after the rebellion against Rehoboam. Then we have Abijah, who we're going to mention just very briefly at the end of this chapter. He's Rehoboam's son with his wife Maacah, and Abijah will be the one to take the throne after Rehoboam dies. Okay, so now to the map. Rehoboam was made king in the city of Shechem, but he reigned from Jerusalem. The king of Egypt is going to be discussed in this chapter. Now, Egypt is to the southwest of the land of Judah. If you see the land of Simeon there, you go southwest of that, you run into Egypt pretty quickly. The king of Egypt brought his army up north to fight against the people of Judah. That takes us to our 16-verse outline. I've got it divided into two different sections. The first one is the first 11 verses. Rehoboam rebels against the Lord and is punished by Egypt. So after Rehoboam had been king for a while, after he had established himself as king in Judah, he abandoned God and he became wicked. Now, because of Judah's evil, God allowed Shishak, the king of Egypt, to attack Judah, and he brought a huge army. He brought 1,000 chariots and, the text says, innumerable men on this campaign. After defeating Judah's fortified cities, Shishak's army started approaching Jerusalem and threatening to conquer that city as well. Now, Shemaiah, the prophet of God, was sent to Rehoboam, and he told Rehoboam that God had abandoned him because Rehoboam had abandoned God. This was the warning that God had been giving for years and years and years. If you turn your back on me, I'll turn my back on you, and I will allow your enemies to oppress you. It seems like the kings really had a hard time understanding this message. They thought they could rule the kingdom by themselves without God's help. And as we'll see in the upcoming centuries, that never really works out because God's promises are always true and God's word's always correct. So Shishak has been allowed to invade Judah because of Rehoboam's rebellion against God. Now, to Rehoboam's credit, him and his princes humbled themselves and repented. And God, being gracious, acknowledged their repentance and spared the city of Jerusalem. But Rehoboam did have to surrender to Shishak. Shishak took away all the valuables that were in the temple and in the king's house and basically spoiled the city. We're told specifically that he took away all the gold shields that had been made by Solomon during the years of his prosperity. You can read about those shields in 1 Kings chapter 10, verse 16 and 17. That then takes us to section number 2, verses 12 through 16, which is basically just a summary of the rest of Rehoboam's reign and his life. After the humbling experience of having Egypt invade them and having to surrender to them, conditions improved over time steadily in Judah. Rehoboam ended up reigning for 17 years. Now, unfortunately, the text tells us that he wasn't always faithful to God. He had this bad tendency of, sometimes he was faithful, sometimes he wasn't. He wasn't consistent about it. We're told that his son Abijah reigned in his place after his death, and it's with Abijah that we'll pick up in the next couple chapters. And so that is 2 Chronicles chapter 12. Now, the application. How metaphorical is it, the plundering of Solomon's gold shields and the withdrawal of God's shield of protection from Judah? This should instruct all civil leaders and all citizens of all countries, no matter how great those countries have been in the past, how powerful, whether they've been a world power or not. Every single nation is vulnerable to almost instant collapse when they walk away from God. Judah fell from world prominence in just one generation. You think about how great they were during the days of Solomon. And now, Egypt is overrunning them one generation later. Don't be foolish enough to believe that God still lacks the tools to humble nations in these ways. I think a lot of times we think, well, if a nation turns away from God, then they'll just kind of experience this slow and gradual decline over time. But that's not necessarily the case. God certainly has the ability to humble them this quickly today as he did back in Rehoboam's day. So for application, this is why it's important for every single generation to know the Lord, and the best way to protect your nation is to instill a love for God in the future generations. A lot of people have a lot of theories about, what's going to make a nation strong, what we should be fighting for, but really we should be fighting for our children and our grandchildren to have a knowledge and a love for God. Without God's shield of protection, no constitution, no system of government, no system of checks and balances, no laws, no military force can prevent the downfall of a nation if God turns his face away from it. Thanks for joining me today for 2 Chronicles chapter 12. Lord willing, we'll be back tomorrow for chapter 13.